Okay, so we're talking about the Great Depression in more detail, a little bit more about the New Deal. We'll also be talking about the beginnings of World War II. I'll discuss Senator Huey Long, something called the Townsend Plan, the Social Security Act of 1935, Works Progress Administration, also called the WPA, the Rural Electrification Act, the Wagner Act, Fair Labor Standards Act, the Good Neighbor Policy, Isolationism, Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, the Axis Pact, Hirohito, and the Tripartite Pact. Any questions on those? No different? Okay. Several years ago, I had a student from Romania. She had grown up in Romania under a communist dictatorship, and told us, the class, about just what exactly television was when you watched it in Romania, when it was still a dictatorship, a man named Nicolae Ceausescu. Basically, it was about 3 hours a day. About 1 hour of a very heavily edited movie. It was edited so much you never get any ideas the state didn't want you to hear about. It was about 1 hour of news, but only what the government wanted you to know. And then it was a 1 hour speech by the country's dictator. Basically going on and on, over and over again, what he thought he wanted you to hear, wanted you to be passionate about one issue or another. No facts ever to back up anything he said. And of course, no one there to contradict him or present any type of alternative views. Now, as you get into the period of World War II, and also the Great Depression, you see a lot of countries resorting to dictatorships. Essentially, people are so desperate into starvation in those countries that they abandon democracy. They go to dictatorships like this. Same thing very easily could have happened here. Roosevelt said he could easily have been the last president. He was not exaggerating. In fact, there had been rumors that a couple of industrials are trying to entice this one retired general to stage a coup on the government. But the general had reported this to Congress, but there was never any evidence substantiated other than the fact that he said these people had talked to him. Whether it's true or not, who knows, but it fits the tenor of the times. In the late 1930s, our ambassador to England told the United States government, this was Joseph P. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's father, said, democracy's finished in Europe. At that point, it looked like it very nearly was. Now, we talk about the media. One thing you have to understand about how the news works in this country. Their job is not to tell you what you want to hear. Their job is not to support your favorite candidate. Their job simply is to report the facts. Like I said, do you have a lot of editorializing in the news? Yes, but it's usually separate from the hard news you usually see in newspapers and things like that. Like I said, today you have practically a cottage industry of commentators on radio who basically just sit there for 3 hours and tell you what you need to be mad at. No facts ever back up what they say. So-called facts they do present is often twisted or completely fabricated. But all with the view of just basically making you so mad that you'll keep listening and you'll buy whatever they're selling. Either a candidate or some product they're hawking in a commercial, whatever. And you do have things like that in the 1930s. So you have a desperate situation, you have people who try to take advantage of it. And so why do dictators come to power in countries, and why do they stay in power? Because one underlining rule about world history, human nature, international politics is this. People are hungry enough, desperate enough, scared enough for long enough, they will believe pretty much anybody who comes along and promises them a way out. Say the dictatorships, the fascists that came to power in Europe, they came to power because they convinced just enough people who had been hungry enough, scared enough, desperate enough, long enough that they'd solve their problems. Once they were in power, they went after all those remaining who were not opposed to them. That's how dictatorships happen. You get guys like Francisco Franco in Spain, Benito Mussolini in Italy, Adolf Hitler in Germany. Understand, they weren't elected. They just convinced a faction that they were needed, and only they were needed, to rush in and solve their problems. By the 1930s, you have your demagogues in the United States. Look at page 845. One of them is Senator Huey Long of Louisiana. Now, during the Great Depression, you have a lot of people who think Roosevelt either was going too far or not far enough. A lot of members of the upper classes are having their taxes raised by Roosevelt to pay for these New Deal programs, calling Roosevelt a traitor to his class. Back when Roosevelt died and they put his image on the dime, you have all these people getting dimes and change and throwing it back at cashiers because they hated Roosevelt so much. Like I say, you've had Nazi groups in the United States supporting the rise of Adolf Hitler. More later. You have one organization called the American Liberty League, established to combat the New Deal. Attracted prominent Republicans, businessmen, and even prominent Democrats like Al Smith and John W. Davis, the Democratic nominees 1924-1928. 1934, you have the novelist Upton Sinclair running for governor of New York. Sinclair, remember, wrote the novel The Jungle about conditions in the meatpacking industry. 1934, and he's running for California governor under a radical platform called End Poverty called the EPIC, End Poverty in California. Republicans responded by engaging a smear campaign, saying his name wasn't Sinclair, but Sinclair, and he narrowly lost the election. But Huey Long, when the Depression came along, he was already in power. The thing about Louisiana politics, you have to know, is it's populated by very colorful characters. I say even to this day, Louisiana. But Huey Long is he basically acted as a dictator. But he did it with an end in mind. Basically, one of those people believe that the ends justify the means. Like I say, Louisiana was known in the 1920s, 1930s for extraordinarily corrupt politics. Politicians taking bribes back and forth. Politicians going to jail for embezzlement, this, that, and the other. In fact, in the 1940s, there was the sunny story of a Governor Jimmy Davis, popular folk singer at the time. I'm governor of Louisiana. And one of his proudest achievements was what called the Sunshine Bridge. A famous song was "You Are My Sunshine." Actually, a song he wrote about his horse, but it became a very popular song in the 1930s and 40s. So anyway, they built this brand new steel and concrete bridge over the Mississippi River. And what happened was one of his chief lieutenants, who owned an insurance company, had the state take out an insurance policy on the Sunshine Bridge through his company, insuring the bridge against fire and theft. The steel concrete bridge, insured against fire, but also against theft. I kid you not. Those are the kind of shenanigans that went on. Okay. Essentially, most people in Louisiana, basically. You have a question?
Just because I have that talent, I try to come to school with it. It's killing me.
All right. Well, I hope you're feeling better. So go take care of yourself. We'll talk about this later.
Thank you.
Good evening. Actually, all this pollen there right now, I'm surprised we're not all choking. Poor thing. Yeah. Anyway, Louisiana, a lot of people just come to the cynical conclusion that all politicians are stealing from them. And Huey Long basically comes into power citing, if takes a thief to be a politician in Louisiana, he's at least going to steal for the people. Long really accomplished a lot for Louisiana, in spite of his tactics. Modernized the road system, a lot of new paved highways. Capitol building in Baton Rouge, that was what he built. It's actually the tallest Capitol building in the United States. It's a very impressive piece of architecture. Did a lot to advance universities in the state. One of his proudest achievements was he got the legislature to provide free school books for all the school kids in Louisiana. Make sure it's for both black and white kids. But he's very egotistical, bordering on being a dictator. For example, all those paved highways and new bridges he built. Well, if you opposed Huey Long, he'd make sure that paving stopped right at your parish line, or right at your district boundary. Make sure if you opposed him, you wouldn't get a dime of this. One day he caught wind that a student was about to publish a letter critical of Long in the LSU student newspaper. Huey sent the state police down there and ordered the press to be stopped, saying, I'm not paying those kids to criticize me. Well, in 1932, like I said, their U.S. senator had died, and Long replaces this senator. It's a governor in that state could appoint a successor until the next election. Replaces him with himself. So for a while, Huey is both governor and senator of Louisiana. People make the point, said, well, Huey, said, why aren't you doing anything in Washington? You're still here in Baton Rouge. Said, well, the last guy was there, he didn't do anything in Washington either. But Huey was easily elected. In fact, his son was a U.S. senator in Louisiana for decades, on up into the 1980s. But originally he's very supportive of Roosevelt. Actually helps get Roosevelt the nomination he needs through getting the delegates together for Louisiana and Mississippi. But by 1934, Huey Long had broken with Roosevelt. Basically upset that Roosevelt had not appointed a lot of his favorite people to cabinet positions, or judgeships, wasn't taking enough of his advice. So Long proposes his own program. nationwide radio announcing what called the Share Our Wealth Society Club. See here on page 845. Call himself the Kingfish. So the Share Our Wealth movement, he said, was designed to make every man a king. Proposed system to guarantee every American a $5,000 home and $2,500 annual income. It's guaranteed no matter what else you do, you at least $2,500 a year. Except $5,000 home, it wasn't much, but like a little shotgun row houses see that here in the neighborhood, but $2,500 annual incomes that not living great, but you get by. They say finance is in part by 100% tax on incomes over $1 million. That is, anything you make over $1 million, that's taxed at 100%. They encourage people to form their own Share Our Wealth clubs in communities across the country. By 1935, the Share Our Wealth clubs had attracted over 1 million members. Actually, we have 7 million members. Millions of people were interested in this program. They're desperate, they're hungry, and you're homeless, and part of that 25% unemployment in 1932 said that this plan looks pretty good. But never mind the details. Huey Long is threatening to run against Roosevelt in 1936, but 1935 he was back in Baton Rouge. He was overseeing a special session of the state legislature, basically trying to redraw boundaries of judicial and legislative districts to draw his opponents out of their political careers. Basically, he's telling the governor at that time, who basically been handpicked by Long, what to do. And he's marching up and down the halls, telling people what to do. And this one man, who was the son-in-law of one judge who was about to be kicked out of office, been trying to confront Long all night, explain his position to him, when encounters Long to get into a scuffle. A gun's drawn, and Long's bodyguards pull out their .45s and start firing, shoot, and kill the guy. Huey Long is shot. He stumbles downstairs, rushed to a hospital where he later dies. As they say, you can still go to the Louisiana State Capitol and see the bullet holes in the walls. The ironic situation, though, is the gun this guy was carrying was just a .32. The gun Long's bodyguards carrying, .45s. The bullet found in Huey Long, .45. Oops. So you get what you pay for, going cards. So Huey Long was dead. Actually enough, his brother Earl Long eventually became governor, known for a number of forms of very progressive on civil rights issues. The thing is, though, Earl Long wasn't the bully that Huey Long was, but he actually managed to pull tricks that Huey Long never could, managed to get things done that Huey Long never could. He had that famous movie made about him, about his affair with this stripper in the early 1960s. Maybe Paul and Nicole Blaze. It's a funny movie. But, the whole family's right from Wynn Parish, not far from here. But that's Huey Long. Another character he has is Father Charles Coughlin. Roman Catholic priest from Detroit. Attracted a broad audience to his nationwide radio program. He too originally supported Roosevelt, but broke with him in 1934 and started appealing to disenchanted through these bizarre money schemes and anti-Semitism. Actually, it's a very nasty thing, basically trying to blame Jews for the Depression. It's very things that really doesn't make any sense at all. Out of these bizarre get-rich-quick schemes, Coughlin, and these bizarre get-rich-quick schemes trying to get his audience to pay attention to. He eventually got to the point he denounced the New Deal, what he called the pagan deal, and called for bizarre monetary inflation schemes and nationalization of the banking system. Basically called for the government to take over all the banks, and kept trying to get his audience to participate in these bizarre Ponzi schemes with money. Another man he had here is Dr. Francis Townsend. He came up with something called the Townsend Plan. Townsend was a 67-year-old physician. He came forward with the Townsend Plan in 1934 as a scheme to assist the elderly who had suffered tremendously during the Great Depression. Got to remember, up to the 1930s, there really was no such thing as retirement. You basically worked until you couldn't work anymore. There weren't pensions or Social Security yet or anything like that. Just worked until you couldn't work anymore, or in which case you better just hope your family is able to take you in. But also remember, before there were such things as age discrimination laws. Like I said, the elderly usually were the first ones fired when this company started going under. And when tried to find more work, well, he was going to hire a 60, 70-year-old man. Well, you can hire a 20-year-old man for half the rate. Getting twice the work. So, the elderly cannot be rehired. So the Townsend Plan, so it's just a step forward the idea that everyone over 60 will be given a $200 a month pension. Everybody over 60 gets $200 a month. But the provision that it had to be spent by the end of the month. You had to spend all $200 of it. Townsend saw it as a way to not only help the elderly, but also help end the Depression by stimulating spending in the economy, because that money had to be spent. Well, critics charged it would ruin the economy, but 10 million people ended up signing petitions endorsing the Townsend Plan and asking Congress to act. Well, after the 1934 midterm elections, the Democrats expanded their majorities in the House and the Senate. Like I say, in most times, the midterm elections is the election between presidential elections. The party of the White House usually ends up losing seats, but in this case, the Democrats greatly expanded their majorities because people were very much in favor of what they were doing in the Depression. And after the 1934 midterm elections, Democrats in Congress went to expand the New Deal even further. Well, one of the most sweeping and enduring piece of legislation from that, period called the Second New Deal, was the Social Security Act of 1935, inspired by the Townsend Plan. Now, so here's how Social Security works. Now, Social Security is designed to do what they call as old age insurance. Not designed to take care of all of your monetary needs, but some. Social Security would be one of several resources you were to have, such as any type of savings you might have or any other pension plan you might have. It will be funded half by payroll tax, half paid by you, and half by your employer. So you see your paycheck, you see that deduction for Social Security, that's what's happening there. Your employer is paying that same amount if that's not reflected in your paycheck. But it was designed as a pay-as-you-go program. That is, the money that the government takes out of your check to pay for Social Security is not put aside in an account just for you for when you retire. It actually goes into this big pool and goes to support the people who are on the system right now. So basically, if you're working right now, you're paying for your grandparents' Social Security. And when you retire, your grandkids are going to pay for your Social Security with their paycheck. Basically, every generation helps out the other one. Everybody's responsible for somebody else. Yeah. So, but the thing about Social Security was, while the elderly are suffering tremendously during this time, it's not aimed just at the elderly. Social Security also covers payments for the disabled. There's SSI payments. That's for Social Security. The blind. Dependent children who have lost a parent. That is, one parent dies, I suppose dad is killed in a factory accident or something, then the kids will get, every month until they turn 18, payments from Social Security. Because that was a very serious problem in the United States at that time, which was the main breadwinner dies and the family ends up losing everything. Well, this way, say you die, the kids are not going to be starving in the streets. So it's done a lot to help the disabled, so not have the blind begging on corners, starving children. The elderly have something. And this probably as probably the most successful part of the program. 90% of people on Social Security right now, that is their sole source of income. They got some guy who's 80 years old, that's all he's got coming in is that Social Security check. So what's he going to do at age 80? Is he going to go work at the refinery? So you might see some reader at Walmart with that job, but you see some of them there think that they're just too old to be doing that. What it does is this helps alleviate the problem of poverty for the elderly. Now, old age benefits kick in at 65. But here's the problem. What's life expectancy in 1935? 63. So you had a lot of people who died in their 50s, but 63 is life expectancy. You weren't expected to live to collect very long. But as successful as this program's been, though, there is a demographic problem. See, what's life expectancy today in the United States after decades of advances in medicine?
70s and 80s. 78.
Yeah, 78. So the problem is, though, age here is 65. I started noticing this problem. 1938, the U.S. Census Bureau predicted that the population of the United States would peak in 1988 at 180 million. That's just using projections they had in 1938. But a lot changed in the country. This generation that's growing up during the Great Depression and World War II, they end up having a bunch of kids, called the baby boom generation. But that generation didn't have nearly as many kids, and they're getting to retire. And so what happened is they didn't quite take demographic changes like that into account. It's got a huge wave of immigration, something alleviated, but the problem is 1935, you'd have about 5 workers paying into the system for every 1 recipient. But the baby boom generation comes along, 1940s, 1950s, they don't have nearly so many kids. That's more in the 1970s and 1980s. So, yeah, down to about 2 or 3 people paying in for every person receiving. Right now, the system's running surplus. But when the baby boom generation really starts retiring, that's going to put a real strain on the system. So, realizing that, the government had to do some modifications to the system. You say in the 1980s, they raised taxes on Social Security and raised the aid for younger Americans where they could receive old age benefits from 65 up to 67. So, for all of us, we're not going to be able to receive it until 67. But also the other problem is it's going to come a point in the next few years that Social Security is going to start running a deficit. Now what happens gets to the point that the trust fund is exhausted. It's a real possibility. What's going to happen is Social Security, unless there's some changes, Social Security will only be able to pay 75% of promised benefits. It gets to the point they just simply can't pay anything out. They can't pay out everything they owe you. Now there's several alternatives to that. You could raise the payroll taxes on everybody. You could raise the retirement age to 70, which is put a real strain on people who do a lot of manual labor for a living. One proposal was that there's a cap on Social Security payroll taxes that is making over $125,000 a year. You don't pay any payroll taxes on anything over that. But what ends up happening, but if they lifted that cap, made everybody pay the payroll tax over $125,000, they say it could be funded until year 2100. Some people propose privatizing it. It's basically all that money put into it, basically put into account just for you and let you invest it. Basically privatizing it. Or there's a problem. What about these people right here? Because in addition to old age insurance, the disabled, you're also paying unemployment insurance. That's their Social Security. And because if you just privatize the system, just this alone costs $1 trillion a year. And of course, if people say, well, people have that extra money, they're just going to invest it. Well, think of the average American family today. you have extra money coming in, what's the average parent going to spend it on? His own retirement or shoes for his kids? Shoes for kids. They spend it on right now. That's what they need right now. They'll be out with nothing. And of course, well, okay, you play the stock market, but odds are that if you're in the stock market long enough, you can make a little bit of money off it, but the odds are there's also a chance you could lose everything. So let's be honest, if any of us in this room were that good with stocks, we'll be sitting here right now? No. We'd be sitting on some beach in Bermuda sipping pina coladas all day. See, stock market, IRAs, things like that, that's taking a chance. There's no guarantee it'll pay off. So you might be doing well in stock right now, but it could crash tomorrow. Then what do you got? Nothing. Social Security was that guarantee. That's mean insurance, the what if. What if you don't have enough money? Well, you have the old age insurance, your Social Security check. One guarantee, you've got something coming in. And so through Social Security, we basically solved that problem in society. What happens when you're 80 years old and can't work anymore? Here to page 848, there is a poster for a Social Security program, talk about from the 1930s, saying who's eligible, what to do, how to apply. It's a monthly check to you when you're starting when you're 65. Well, Social Security, you have a lot of people arguing it didn't go far enough. A lot of conservatives saying it's too much, saying it tore away America's traditional self-reliance and individualism. Social Security designed to begin in 1942, modest payments of $10 or $85 a month. Initially, farmers and domestic servants were included. In the meantime, though, it has been a very successful program providing a means of survival for millions of Americans. Well, there are many other Social Security New Deal programs along this time. One of them is the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. It was created in 1933. What the TVA did was it created flooding along the Tennessee River had been a major problem for Tennessee for many years. And so what the TVA did was create a system of dams along the Tennessee River to control that flooding. So flooding was not nearly the problem it was. But this just wasn't just any type of dam. These were hydroelectric dams. But as the water that is let through turns the turbines to produce electricity. Before 1933, most rural residents of Tennessee did not have electricity. But because of the TVA and hydroelectric dams, now they did. In fact, TVA is still the largest power producer in the state of Tennessee. Providing electricity for the region, lakes for fishing, recreation. Of course, people building those dams, maintaining them afterward, provided a lot of jobs for that state. Another thing came along, what 1934 was the Securities and Exchange Commission. In the 1920s, price fixing and stock fraud was very common. There's no one to regulate it. The SEC comes in and makes sure that stocks as they're being traded fairly and honestly. That no one's getting any unfair advantages, and no one's trying to fix the prices, and no one's trying to manipulate the market. It's trying to ruin billions so they can make a few bucks for themselves. What other programs you have come along include the Rural Electrification Act, REA, which was passed in 1935. Arkansas slowly, but it's championed by such figures as Congressman Lyndon Johnson of Texas. Basically, its job was to provide electricity for rural areas of America, those outlying areas that didn't have access to it. Like I said, the cities all had electricity at this time, but the power companies, the privately owned power companies, did not want to go to the expense of trying to expand their reach out into these rural areas. If they're putting up miles of power line for one customer on one farm way out on the end of the road, just didn't want to go to the expense or bother of it. So the REA went out and made sure that these rural areas had it. Essentially modernizing America's farms, trying to have electrical equipment. Established a lot of rural electrical cooperatives in a lot of communities. In fact, a lot of them are still around today. But ultimately, the REA provided electricity to 90% of rural areas that did not have electricity. It's basically brought electricity to rural America. It may not have been anything more than a wire from the ceiling and a light bulb attached to it, but that was electricity. Work relief programs. There are a couple of different work relief programs, such as the PWA and the CWA. But probably the most famous one is the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, established by President Roosevelt in 1935. It's established to spend nearly $5 billion earmarked for relief programs. That's a big chunk of change, even by today's standards. Essentially, it's designed to put America to work. America had all these little things that needed to be done, had a lot of unemployed with skills that needed to be harnessed, the unemployed needed work, they needed paychecks. WPA was the answer. And the WPA did all sorts of things. Critics complained that the amount of hiring the jobless for make work tasks, but communities across the country benefited from the WPA. They did such things as helping pave highways, paving sidewalks. You can go to neighborhoods across the country today and still see WPA stamped on the sidewalks. They brought culture to many small towns and communities. They hired actors to put on plays across the country. They hired artists to paint murals in public buildings. So they built post offices, they built schools. In fact, the gymnasium over here, the college has, that was built in 1940 through the WPA. Still standing today. Built and repaired schools. For the poor, they hired women to work in the WPA sewing rooms, making clothing for the poor, canning food for the poor. Payments typically are very low, sometimes $52 a month, but sometimes you are paid in cash, sometimes in clothing put together in those sewing rooms, sometimes just paid in food put together in those canneries. That any one of those things was needed in the Great Depression. Like I said, my great-grandparents worked at the WPA during the Great Depression. My great-grandmother worked in those WPA sewing rooms. Talked about things were so desperate that for her two daughters, my grandmother and her sister, they basically had to use curtains to make dresses. Other people are basically using old potato sacks for dresses, flour sacks. But basically, because of that program, they were able to eat. I talked to one man once who'd grown up during the Depression. He lived in Denton, Texas, just outside of about 30 miles from Dallas, and a friend of his had borrowed $1 from him. That's a lot of money in the 1930s. Well, one day the guy had been paid, and he walks that 30 miles from Dallas to Denton to pay back that $1. He said because that guy paid that $1, that their family was able to eat that night. Remember anything about the Great Depression, do not forget that. It's that $1 would make difference when people eat or went hungry. You can talk about economic numbers and everything else all day. That's what it comes down to for families. Do we eat or not? Without WPA, people wouldn't eat. But because of WPA, communities are able to have all sorts of new facilities for people, community theaters, parks, playgrounds, schools, sidewalks. Interestingly enough, one project they did was they hired people to go out and record adult music all over the country. The great early blues artists and jazz artists that otherwise never would have been heard of, their music is known today because they recorded this. They also hired historians to go out and talk to Civil War veterans and also former slaves. The slave narratives, that's some of the very few first-person accounts we have of slavery that survived to this day. That was disturbing. And sometimes I think about these recordings, I think, 20, 30 years from now, people listening to this, what are they going to think about some of this? And who is that kid delivering that lecture? But because of these programs, America is surviving. America is starting to recover. Looking at the macroeconomic picture, the big picture, what do the numbers say? What's happening? Well, by 1935, the gross national product of the United States has come back to pre-crash levels. America has gotten back to breaking even to 1929. By 1937, per capita income in this country is back to pre-crash levels. America is slowly coming back. Unemployment is coming down a little at a time. Like I said, there is not any way you can solve this problem overnight. The economy disintegrated. It took years and years to build up, torn down very quickly. It's not coming back quickly. Think otherwise is just not living in the real world. What's happening is people are eating with hope. They are saving money. They are spending money. They can plan ahead. They have homes. They're getting little jobs here and there. The economy is starting to pick up. At every measurable standard, the economy is starting to improve. America is pulling out of the Great Depression. And we didn't have to turn into a dictatorship to do it. America goes even further. Expansion of labor rights. Particularly with what can be called the Wagner Act. It's called the National Labor Relations Act. What the National Labor Relations Act did was provide expanded rights for labor. Basically, for people, they could organize into unions, they could speak to employers, basically. it helped expand and protect freedom of assembly in this country. Allowed people to gather and speak their opinions. Wagner Act banned what they called company unions. It is corporations would sometimes would form their own union and say, yes, okay, workers can join this union, but corporations already set up how the union is to be run, what the rules were, and what they could ask for. Otherwise, everything else what they could discuss was banned by the company union. Basically, it allowed workers to form their own unions. That would be a protected right across the country. The National Labor Relations Board was established with this act. National Labor Relations Board presided over labor management relations and enabled unions to engage in collective bargaining with federal support. That is, if there's a dispute between labor and management, they take it to the National Labor Relations Board, they go to mediation. Essentially, labor is guaranteed the opportunity to negotiate their own contracts. So they can ask for certain standards in workplace safety, benefits, wages, hours, things like that. With all this in hand, Roosevelt's popularity soared. Going to the 1936 election, Roosevelt was the overwhelming choice by Democrats for the nomination. The Republicans nominated a very lackluster candidate, Alfred M. Landon of Kansas. But Landon disappointed a lot of Roosevelt's opponents who had a violent hatred of Roosevelt by refusing to campaign against the New Deal. Essentially, Landon's campaign was, I can do the New Deal better than Roosevelt. A lot of people were upset at the New Deal, but Landon, seeing popularity of it, simply said, but I can do better. Well, the remains of Huey Long's organization sent up a congressman in North Dakota man named William Lemke, running on what's called the Union Party ticket. Except that Roosevelt's popularity couldn't be beat. Roosevelt won every state except Maine and Vermont. Roosevelt gets 60.8% of the vote, 523 electoral votes. Landon gets 36.5%, 8 electoral votes. Lemke gets 1.9%. It goes to Roosevelt easily. Interestingly enough, Landon's daughter, Nancy Caswell, ended up later becoming a U.S. Senator from Kansas, one of the very early woman senator. Democrats increased their margins further, margins of 331 to 89 in the House, 15 belonged to minor parties, margins of 76 to 16 in the Senate. Now, in Roosevelt's second administration, you do have one important piece of legislation passed. That is the Fair Labor Standards Act. This is a very important piece of legislation. It basically helps define your rights in the workplace. It does, among other things, is provides overtime if you work 40 hours, more than 40 hours a week. Basically, time and a half for overtime as established by this act. It bans child labor once and for all. In fact, Democrats were able to get that through by arguing that these kids should be in school and not taking up jobs that men with family support should be taking. Basically, give these jobs to adults who need to support their families. So child labor is banned. You got overtime. You also have the minimum wage established. Roosevelt argued that there is no reason why a man should be working a full-time job and not being able to support himself. That he needs to be paid the bare subsistence needed to live. That's the very idea behind a minimum wage. Just from an economic standpoint, why pay somebody so little they can't even pay their bills? So what incentive do they have to work? None. I give you some data here, the minimum wage. It started out as at 25 cents an hour. The history of the minimum wage here, plus the wage adjusted for inflation. Like I said, the wage went up to 30 cents an hour in 1939. Adjusted for inflation, that means going from about 4 1/4 an hour to a little over 5 an hour. And so usually when they increase minimum wage, when it's increased, it's usually a little bit at a time. It's increased in 1945, also increased in 50 up to 75 an hour. Increases in 1960 up to $1 an hour, up to $1.25 an hour, putting it here at $9.72 an hour. Seeing people today call for increase in minimum wage, calling for like a $10 or $12 minimum wage. They're saying that because, look at it adjusted for inflation, that has happened in the past. 1968 minimum wage was raised to $1.60 an hour. Adjusted for inflation, that's $11 an hour. They said the last increase was in 2007. They staircased it up to $7.25 an hour by 2009, or it stayed ever since. But let's take a look at how quickly look at how the New Deal is helping different portions of the population. New Deal helped African Americans bear the burden of the Depression, but prejudice sharpened by the Depression still hindered a lot of African Americans gaining access to New Deal programs. But Roosevelt worked very hard to try to make sure that African Americans and other minorities would have access to these programs. So as a result, 75% of African Americans voted for Roosevelt in 1936, banning the Republican Party once and for all. Roosevelt also appointed several African Americans to prominent positions in the New Deal and other areas of the administration. Native Americans, attempts to reforming Native Americans had greater success. I've been getting this semester, John Collier heading up the Bureau of Indian Affairs, bringing more Native Americans into the Indian Bureau, pushing programs to stress tribal unity and autonomy. It's helped for the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. Women also made gains under Roosevelt. For the first woman cabinet secretary, Frances Perkins, the Secretary of Labor. She had been his Secretary of Labor in New York, served ably, and served 12 years as Secretary of Labor until she retired in 1945. Roosevelt also appointed the first women as ambassadors and the first women as federal judges. First time ever. But he can run into problems in the second term. Political problems, disputes over the Supreme Court, and increasingly foreign policy issues leading up to World War II. Let's stop there for right now.